and welcome to the live TWIS podcast broadcast. We are back for another week of science discussion, and we're so glad to have you here. Just to let everybody know, remember, this is a live broadcast. Errors that are made, we don't make that many mistakes, really, but every once in a while, there are things to edit out, and those things do not make it to the podcast. So this is the live fun times. So we are glad you are here with us. And make sure you click all the likes and the shares and get other people to join us for the next Tight 90 of science discussion. Yeah? We ready? Yes. There's head nodding. Yes. Head nodding in an audio podcast.
This is edited out of the audio podcast.
It is, I know.
So nobody even knows we were nodding.
Except for people who are here right now. All right, so let's start this show business. In 3, 2, this is TWIS. This Week in Science, episode number 918, recorded on Wednesday, March 22nd, 2023. The science Springquinox. It's super fresh. I'll let you know that. I'm Dr. Kiki, and today we will fill your heads with chemicals, depression, and fevers. But first,
Disclaimer. AI is changing everything. Well, maybe not everything yet, but it's just getting started. And already there are questions. The academic world is struggling to keep up with students who may be brilliant, but write like a robot. Or students who skipped required reading, yet turned in a perfectly astute essay. If a teacher uses AI detectors to determine a real from generated paper, are they the ones cheating? If AI is used to grade papers, is that cheating? AI is a powerful research tool, and that is not cheating. If your research paper, though, is entirely AI generated, that seems like cheating. But what if you're guided AI in some way? Does it count if its findings are valid? What if they are not? AI recently predicted that several hundred millions of protein folds would, based off single sequences, would have certain formations. But how accurate are they? If they are close enough to accurate, is it science? How close? If they are not close, is it still science? A car drives off a cliff, runs over a pedestrian. Was it driver error? Was the driver even the driver? Does that even matter for assigning fault? Are deep fakes fraud or free speech? Is AI-based stock trading a tool, or is it cheating the system? Is AI-based trading becoming more popular and automated? And if so, is having an AI-based economy wise? We humans live in a world of words. What does it mean if we aren't the ones generating those words, interpreting those words? What jobs will be left for humans to perform when knowledge-based word generation and automated physical systems are everywhere? And actually worse, the worst case scenario of all. What if one day AI replaces This Week in Science? Coming up next.
I've got the kind of mind that can't get enough. I want to learn everything. I want to fill it all up with new discoveries that happen every day of the week. There's only one place to go to find the knowledge I seek. I want to know what's happening. What's happening? What's happening this week in science? What's happening? What's happening? What's happening this week in science?
Good science to you, Kiki and Blair.
and a good science to you too, Justin, Blair, and everyone out there. Welcome to This Week in Science. Thank you so much for joining us for another science-filled episode. Blair, so good to have you back.
Yes, I'm so happy to be back.
Yay! All right, we have wonderful science ahead for you. Like I said, all sorts of great fun things. I've got some neutrinos, flipping galaxies, some big eyes, and microscopes for mice. What do you have, Justin?
Oh, those research mice, they need them. They
They
need the
do.
lab supplies. Oh, gosh, what did I bring? That's a great question. Let me scroll over and see if I can remember. Oh, yes, I've got Baltic blasts. Not so forever chemicals, after all, maybe. Sourcing depression to a single gut enzyme. And Toxoplasma gondii strikes again.
Oh, you know it always
show.
strikes back. What is in the animal corner this week?
Oh my goodness. Well, those same lab mice you were talking about before, they like to pee everywhere, and we're going to talk about why and when and how and when not. We're also going to talk about strange birds, and in the short stories, I want to talk about fevers in fish and maybe humans.
Fish fevers. I have
Yeah.
never even contemplated this possibility. So
Yeah.
I'm very interested
I'm very
in this.
curious about actually the fever story because
Yeah.
I had there's an ongoing debate in the Jackson household.
Yes.
About-
We're going to get
about
into it.
exactly this. Yeah.
Ooh.
I bet it's exactly what this is about. I can't wait.
Well, I hope everyone else is as excited about all these topics as we all are. And as we jump into the show here, I would like to remind you that This Week in Science is available as a podcast pretty much all places that podcasts are found. Look for This Week in Science, TWIS. We broadcast live weekly, streaming from YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook. We are at TWIS Science on Twitch, Twitter, Mastodon, and Instagram. And you can find our website at twis.org. Let's start the science.
Let's do.
Let's do it. Okay, first things first. Large Hadron Collider news. There were some neutrinos discovered in 2021 by researchers looking at the phaser particle detector at the Large Hadron Collider in CERN. And phaser stands for Forward Search Experiment. And its purpose was to try and detect particles that are produced by the collisions that happen within the Large Hadron Collider. Specifically, they have been searching for these neutrinos because neutrinos, they're one of the most important particles for the Standard Model. They also don't really interact with anything, so they just kind of go through stuff and you don't bother with them a lot. And so they're hard to find. We have a really hard time detecting them. We have various detectors around the world, a big giant detector full of water in Japan that detects them. We also have at the ice cube detector in Antarctica looking for neutrinos. It's found a few. But actually being able to find neutrinos that come from the collisions that we create, we can start to really understand the forces and the interactions that actually lead to these particles. And then we can start really understanding the Standard Model more and how the neutrinos fit into it. Like, we can start putting pieces together. And so over the last few years, the Large Hadron Collider had been down for upgrades. It got upgraded. It came back online again, and the data has been coming in. And the researchers from the University of California, Irvine, have reported on their findings. And the report is ridiculously successful. So when we normally talk about like physics experiments and the success, it's like, oh, this was a 5 sigma or a 6 sigma significance rate, right? And that's like really good. This data that they now have from 2021 and the new upgrade of the Large Hadron Collider, 16 sigma. So
That's so many sigmas.
it's so many sigmas, but really what it means is the chance that they didn't actually find neutrinos is
Right.
pretty much impossible. That
They're pretty
basically-
darn sure, basically,
They are
is the math
really-
language for that.
'Cause
That's
I
exactly
think it's
it.
something like
Yeah.
airline air controls are working at like 6 sigma or
Right.
something like this. Like,
Yeah.
you know, like those are the people like in charge of air traffic, the traffic
Yeah.
control folks. They're working on a system of, I think it's 6 sigma. Maybe it gets into 7, but I think it's somewhere in there in terms of not messing up or not having an error.
Right. And so 16 sigma is just, it's order of magnitude larger. Instead of single digits, we're in double digits. I mean, they're very, very positive about their findings and neutrinos. I mean, it's been 70 years since they were first discovered, and these researchers are very excited about this particular finding. Researchers saying neutrinos are the only known particles that the much larger experiments at the Large Hadron Collider are unable to directly detect. So Phaser's successful observation means the collider's full physics potential is finally being exploited.
Lon in the chat room says, I consider the LHC a failure. The standard model still stands. Happy. Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, there was absolutely the excitement that this is going to ruin everything how we thought their things were, and there would be all the alternative theories of physics had their chance with the LHC to show that, hey, maybe the fringy ideas, which in physics everything is kind of a fringe idea in some respect, to be honest. Yeah, or is the fundamental rules of the universe, it's one or the other. You don't really.
I like that it's confirming the view that we've had so far. So we've got a lot of confirmation of stuff, and that's really awesome. We're still missing big pieces, though. One of the other things that Phaser is set up to do is to identify the things, the particles, the bits, the pieces that make up dark matter. And they haven't done that yet, but that is one of the goals, one of the things that Phaser is supposed to be doing, looking for signs of dark matter. So maybe new things will come.
So Lon in the chat room, keep up the hope.
Keep it up. We can always hope for something new.
Our placeholder for this thing that we haven't quite figured out might have to get replaced with something that's different than the things that have been proposed for the placeholder. There's still hope for a little bit of disruptive information to come from LHC.
Speaking of disruptions, do you want to talk about some dangers, Justin?
Oh yeah. So this is. I don't know if the two of you watch the news or our viewers.
Watch the news?
The news? Never heard of it.
Anything outside of the world of science. But apparently a while back, September of 2022, there was some explosions at the bottom of the Baltic Sea that may have been intentional explosions that broke some pipelines that had been built to bring natural gas from Russia to Germany. Mm-hmm. The Nordstream 1 and the Nordstream 2 pipelines, two separate pipelines in the same area underneath the Baltic Sea, blew up underwater. And out of that came, now all the natural gas poured out for a while till they realized, we got a problem. We went from 150-something atmospheres of pressure in our pipe down to just a few. There's a hole there. Let's shut it down. Anyway, the turns out this is also a bit of a environmental hazard.
You don't say.
And not necessarily for the reasons people might suspect.
Okay.
Some Danish researchers went and looked at what are the environmental impacts of these pipelines. It took place right off the coast of the far eastern island of Denmark, Bornholm, which sits there in the middle of the Baltic Sea, just north of Poland. And For one thing, they have harbor porpoises, which are endangered in the Baltic. Now, they're not endangered everywhere, but they're endangered there, and there's a population of only 500, and so they calculated what that blast could have done to the local population, the concussive explosion. And they found that they could have, if they were close, if there were any individuals close, they could have been killed. If they were within 50 kilometers of the explosions, they could have lost some hearing, which especially if it was a female, that lack of hearing reduces the ability to find mates. And, Blair's nodding her head. She understands you don't want to lose your hearing as a critically endangered species.
I mean, porpoises like to talk to each other, as we've discussed.
Yeah.
They recognize each other's voices and calls. Hearing is pretty important to their social structure.
And the U.S. Navy and other institutions have had lots of research evidence that noises under the surface of the ocean can have detrimental effects on hearing of these animals. Yep.
There's also a couple of species of seals and all the fish that would have been in there, because it was an explosion that was recorded, at least seismically, to be the equivalent of something like 500 kilos of TNT. So really big explosions underwater. Now, that is not the extent of it. This happened to happen in a terrible, terrible, terrible location. Bornholm is lovely. Gorgeous little, it's an island getaway in a Scandinavian sort of way. It still can be very cold in the winter. So sometime after World War II, people decided, hey, we have all these chemical weapons, all this mustard gas lying around and nobody's using, all these arsenic-based chemical weapons. What are we going to do with them?
Don't say dump it in the ocean.
Some reason they dumped them in the ocean.
Oh my god.
No!
Why?
I bet you can guess where they dumped it.
Right by the pipelines.
Well,
Yes.
the pipeline wasn't there yet. And actually, if
Yep.
you look at the pipeline, it comes away from Russia, nice and parallel lines. And then it gets to this dump site area, and it splits, and it goes around it, top and north and south of it. Well, the explosions happened just to the north and just to the south of this chemical weapons dump
Cool.
site in the water.
No, not
What's
cool.
also
Not-
interesting
nope.
about the waters in the Baltic east of Bornholm is that the deep water is stratified, meaning that the ocean currents at the bottom are very subtle. Rarely do they disrupt or churn the sediment at the ocean floor.
Yeah.
So aside from there being a chemical weapons dump that hasn't been churned away or anything like this, been sitting there, also all of human history's use of any sort of chemicals that made it into the sea have just settled to the bottom and remained there. So it's the top layer, that sediment, is all heavy metals. And one of the things they found is there are signs when they got as close as 20 kilometers to the explosions. They're not getting any closer than that right now. The sediment had some signs of mustard gas related chemicals and arsenic related chemicals from the chemical weapons. But the big contributors, the biggest ones is I have to TDT. I have to look up the chemical here, but it's a chemical biocide that was typically mixed into the paints for the hulls of ships to keep little subaquatic critters from growing.
Mm-hmm.
It's a banned chemical now because they found out
Of course
it's an
it is.
endocrine disruptor.
Yeah.
And it's
As many
totally-
chemicals are.
Yeah.
Whoopsie.
However, it's in a shipping lane here that has been using it for the last 40 years before the ban. And so it's settled down into the top 5 centimeters of the soil is the most critically toxically
That was
imbued.
disrupted.
And lead.
This is all
And the
this
next
stuff.
one is lead
Yeah.
because of all of the vehicles and what have you, and engines using leaded fuel for so long. That's it. So what they're finding is there's a 1,200 square kilometer region of the sea that would have experienced a toxic plume for as much as a little over a month after the explosions.
Great.
So
Cool.
all
Fabulous.
there's a lot of intrigue about who done it, and they're testing yachts for explosives, and they're watching satellites, and they've got tracking ships, trying to figure out who done it. But you know, geopolitical concerns aside, for all of this stuff, it was a very terrible location for them to have, I guess, put the pipeline, but another to have blown it up.
So this is the thing, right? Is like this was a known toxic waste dump site.
Yeah.
Known. Yes.
So maybe it's time, everybody, that we look at those known toxic waste sites and start doing something about them before they do something to us.
I don't know what it takes to clean up a entire seafloor or a chemical weapons dump at the bottom of the ocean.
It would have taken less than what it's going to take now.
Yeah.
So, but they went to additional expense in probably spending $1 billion extra of when they laid this seafloor pipeline
to go around
to
it.
do it in a way that didn't disrupt the soil.
Yeah.
That didn't create this resuspension of materials because they were so concerned about it and went way around it. So I'm guessing that the expense to clean it up was much higher. Also,
well, maybe you need to pay that if you want a gas pipeline.
Interestingly, though, it was a tremendous volume of gas that was released. The 115,000 tons of natural gas that escaped, which also would, 15 million tons of CO2 went into the greenhouse gases calculation, which will be removed in a year if 580 million trees are dedicated to the task and nothing else. But they did find that the actual gas itself interaction with the water and the residue from the explosives were not harmful. We're not suspected to have a lasting environmental impact of any kind. So that's good news.
Because the gas is probably bubbled up and out of the water.
Just went straight
However,
up
the sediments and everything that have been floating has a tox. It's like it's pollution. Yes, the pollution. Yeah. Well, gee, that was. I don't think there's any way to put a good news spin on that at all. That was just bad news.
Oh, I didn't even mention that it's a cod spawning ground.
Oh, of course it is.
That's going to be fantastic. We all love our cod liver oil, don't we?
Just make sure, you got to source it. I didn't even know I had to source my cod.
Just don't get it from the toxic waste site in the Baltic Sea.
I had no idea.
Blair.
Yes.
While we're sourcing more healthy cod liver oil, is there another way we should be thinking about fevers and our health?
Yeah, if you have a mild fever out there and you're reaching for the Tylenol, maybe don't. If you're a fish, let's talk about it. This is a study from University of Alberta, and this is a study mostly done. This is done on fish, but they say that this does bring up some interesting ideas about how we care for fevers as humans, because fevers are evolutionarily conserved across the animal kingdom for over 550 million years. And every animal examined has a fever biological response to infection.
Interesting.
So let's step aside from the fact that fish are ectothermic and we're endothermic. So when you're talking about fevers, I feel like there's fundamental differences. But let's just put that aside and talk about what the study is about. So fish were given a bacterial infection. Their behavior was tracked and evaluated using machine learning. They saw similar outward symptoms to humans with a fever, including immobility, fatigue, and malaise. I want to see what a fish with malaise looks like. They were then matched to important immune mechanisms inside those animals. So they were like, yes, they have a fever. The research showed that natural fever actually offered an integrative response that not only activates defense against infection, but also helps control it. They found the fever helped clear the fish of infection in about 7 days, which is half the time it took for animals not allowed to exert fever. Fever also helped shut down inflammation and repaired injured tissue. Now, that's what a fever does, right? It kills cells. That's the point of it. Your body's having an immune response to kill something foreign in your body. But what we know about fevers is if they get too high, they start killing other things too, like brain cells. So I feel like the part that's missing from this study, because they're saying that this is like implication that we should resist reaching for over-the-counter fever medications or NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, at the first sign of a mild temperature. And if you have a mild fever, you should potentially let it run its course. But the key there is the word mild, right? So like, I want to see studies on exactly at what temperature in a human, not a fish, the benefits and the drawbacks are, the benefits outweigh the drawbacks to having a fever. And then when it switches, because that's really what I think the beneficial knowledge here is to a certain extent, I would have guessed this. Fevers are a biological mechanism that our bodies have developed hundreds of millions of years ago. Yeah. There's a reason for it. It's to kill infection. But the reason we suppress fever is that if you have a fever for too long, it is detrimental to your body. And yes, potentially having a fever is better than being dead. But not having a fever still might be better than having a fever. So if you can keep yourself from dying while also not having a fever, that might be better. And so there has to be, if this is true, there has to be a point at which, like, what would be helpful is if you could take your kid's temperature and go, okay, you're at 101. I'm going to let you sit there. I'll check you in an hour.
Right.
You're at 102 now. Time for the Tylenol, right? Like, so like if you could identify the temperature at which, and of course everybody's basal temperature is slightly different. So you'd have to like, and pull to that a little bit, right? So your normal temperature is closer to 97. So your 101 is more like the test subject's 102. So you'd have to look at relative temperatures too, I think. But if you could find the kind of turning point at which fevers are 100% detrimental, I think that would be the thing to look at before you start telling people to let fevers run their course.
Yeah, this is a conversation that we've had here at the Jackson household about whether or not you should just let the fever stay, because the fever has raised the temperature, so it's killing off an infection. Mm-hmm. That's the idea behind it. But then the conversation goes into, well, how high of a temperature does it actually need to be to kill off the bacteria before cells are being damaged? Right. And the answer is probably you're going to be doing detrimental harm once you've got a fever of about 106. Really
that seems high. That seems very high.
Damaging. That for a child, that's really, really high.
Yeah.
Adults, you're told to start looking at going to the hospital if you're at 102. Yeah. 103 for more than a couple of days. So
and my argument has been that fever is a sort of a last defense system for a human, where okay, I've got this thing. At some temperature, I can knock it down. I may do some self-harm, but it's worth it because I have no antibiotics. I have no cure. I don't have orange juice readily available. Whatever it is, in the natural world, that extreme reaction may be the best course of solution for the body to self-attack this thing.
I mean, so topically, we can talk about COVID, right? And the fact that one of the COVID symptoms is having a sustained fever.
Yeah.
And so I can tell you my experience with COVID. I didn't have to go to a hospital. It wasn't that bad, but I had to keep on my Tylenol and I was getting ice put all over my body, the ice bags, and that would push it down. And then a couple hours later, I'd take my temperature, it came back up. I had to push it back down again. It was a constant fight for days to keep my body temperature low. And if it had been high for too long, I could have gotten really, really sick.
Yeah, and that's one of the big questions is with a lot of viruses, you have the body's inflammatory response. The inflammatory response is part of this fever, and sometimes the inflammatory response goes too far and it actually really does start causing damage. And so you don't want to get to the point where the inflammatory or where this part of the body's defense system hits a point of no return and can't come back from it. And you know, that's when you end up in the hospital on all sorts of other medications. And yeah, but it's interesting to think that this is something that is across the animal kingdom, that fevers, they do play a role in the healing.
Yeah. And I don't hate the idea of doing extensive human research and figuring out 99, 100 degrees, let it ride. I think that is a perfectly reasonable thing to say. Your body's, fighting something, let it fight. But at a certain point, you have to recognize when the cost outweighs the benefit.
And another aspect, Justin, to your point about, how high a temperature does it have to be to just destroy the invader, whatever it is. That's not the only thing that we should be considering. It's also, what are the optimal temperatures to enable enzymes and various cellular mechanisms to do their job more efficiently.
Yeah, and that's
And
the
so
part
that's
that
the other
should be
that's the other
interrogated,
side of
because
it.
it could be that aside from that direct heat or the inflammation or any of the rest of it, it could be that that's part of how the body activates certain defense mechanisms.
Yep.
Is by that high heat triggering a cascade effect of now this forms or now this knows what.
Yep.
Yeah. I think my personally comfort is a great healer.
Yeah, that's also true. If you can't sleep, if you're stressed, that also does impact your ability to heal. That's actually a really relevant piece. If you are so febrile that you can't sleep and you can't rest, that's going to be detrimental to your healing also.
Yeah, knock down, get rid of the headache, get rid of that fevery feeling so that you can be calm and relaxed. And if it takes you an extra couple days,
and even sleep,
like based off the fish study to heal, we have this luxury as humans.
Yeah.
That we aren't going to get eaten.
If your
by
workplace
a big
gives
fish.
you sick time. But
that's another.
If you don't have sick time at your job, then you can find another job exactly like it tomorrow. Really.
But that is the point is we are not fish, right? We are not. We have medicine that our wonderful brains have allowed us to create that does help us live the lives that we live better. And so, biology is mushy and wishy-washy, and everybody's going to be different and have their different ideas. But fevers are good, but they're part of the system. But not everyone has to do the same thing. So speaking of not everybody doing the same thing, this also applies to galaxies, apparently. Astronomers have been looking at the sky, because that's what they like to do. And
it's like the only thing that they do. They talk about it all the time.
And one of the things they love to look at is, the active galactic nuclei, right? The bright spots at the center of galaxies that we think are powered by supermassive black holes, and these active galactic nuclei, they're really bright, and they're usually the jets that come out of the black hole center of the galaxy. We call them
It's the
quasars.
jets, and then it's the coalition of all of those things falling into it, getting closer and closer.
Yeah.
It's very densely packed
Right.
with lots of
Stuff gets spit out, and it's all jets flying out. Anyway, this part of a galaxy is, we call them quasars. And they're cool. We like looking at the spewing of stuff out of galaxies. It's very neat for astronomers to look at, very active. Anyway, they can point in all sorts of directions, but if one is pointing at Earth, it's really, really, really bright. And so astronomers like the fancy names, and so they call them blazars. And
quasar is still. It's only because quasar was taken.
yeah, they are
That's like
quasars.
that's the best name of anything in space.
They're
But
still
blazar's pretty
quasars.
good.
Yeah, they're still quasars, but they're pointed at us. And so when they're pointed at us and they're super, super bright, they're called blazars because they're blazing bright, I guess. That must be it. Anyway, sometimes quasars flip direction and do different things, but we've never really see it happening. But they found a galaxy that switched. It used to be a quasar. Now it's a blazar. It's about
So then,
six.
should blazar be like an active verb thing? Like, should it be blazaring?
Blazaring.
Is that galactic nuclei blazaring up all of a sudden?
No, they think it's the same. We don't know. So is it the same amount of energy? What's going on? We don't know why it flipped directions, why it started pointing directly at Earth so that we had to start calling it a blazar. It's located about 656.8 million light years away from our planet. And they've been looking at it from radio signals for a very long time. So they were like, wait, you're kind of weird. And so then they started looking at it with optical, infrared, X-ray, ultraviolet, gamma ray telescopes. They've been looking at all the things. And well, they've determined that because of the way that it moved, they've got a couple of relics of the old jets from when it was a quasar, before it became a blazar. And so the old jets, they're not fed anymore, but there's still kind of material that's hot and out there in space. And so astronomers with all these different electromagnetic spectra of investigation were able to go, oh, the old jets, they're not getting food anymore, so they're all getting quiet. But now we have a jet pointed at us, and why is it like this? Anyway, they're now able to estimate the galaxy's size, and they think that it spans roughly 4 million light years in diameter. That's about 400 times the size of our galaxy. Yeah. Anyway, is 400 right? Yeah, another 2. Yeah, yes, that's another 2. But yeah, this is very interesting to astronomers. They think it might be because the galaxy might have run into another galaxy and so had a little bump like billiard balls, and the new material maybe changed the way that the active galactic nuclei was being fed. Yeah.
Or could it just be more dynamical there? Because if they could still see the other jets, but they've been turned off. Well, maybe all that pressure or whatever I'm calling it pressure, whatever the insane forces are taking place in a quasar, meant that energy still has to go out somewhere, and so maybe that just switched directions.
Right.
I don't
But
know.
why would it switch directions? And so this is the question. We don't know, but the switch allowed us to understand a little bit more about that particular galaxy, but that it also left astronomers with more questions, which is what science is all about. So keep looking at the skies,
I think they need to
astronomers.
switch it to blazaring.
Blazaring.
It's still a quasar. Nothing's changed.
It's
But
blazaring.
now that quasar is blazaring up
All
because
over
it's now
us.
pointing its jet at us.
Right at us. Yes. Tell me about zapping chemicals. It's not.
Yeah, so this
What's
is
happening?
this. We have that problem with the PFAS chemicals. These are the
The
also
non-stick.
known as forever chemicals. They're the water repellent, very famously Teflon, right? The nonstick pan coating that we used to use. Especially terrible because we would heat them and put our food on it.
Yes.
And so those chemicals were especially able to get into humans. But they seem to go everywhere. They're everywhere in our environment. They don't dissolve in water. They don't degrade. And that's a problem because in places where people probably haven't been using a lot of nonstick pans, like the Tibetan Plateau or Antarctica, are covered in these PFAS chemicals because it goes up into the clouds and it comes down in rain. And so it's getting spread everywhere on the planet. It's a known endocrine disruptor. It's really, 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 really bad. Now, in terms of being really, really, really bad, it can't be that bad because it's everywhere and everybody didn't die already.
Plus, you get to turn Everest into a slip and slide this way. So it's pretty fun.
Everything. That's what's really happening. It's all the glaciers are just sliding off because they're so slick now.
So slippery.
Right? So, but they do have places where they get increased concentration through food webs and things like this. Anyway, one of the places where we'd prefer not to be reintroducing it into humans is in our water system, in our drinking water. And these researchers these are engineers up in British Columbia, which is I believe a colony of the UK, north of the United States. They have already been working on for a while some techniques to degrade the PFAS chemicals. And they have a system in which they figured out how to do it. It requires adding a little bit of electricity to some other chemicals. An electrochemical reaction takes place to break them down. So they can do this. Great. But how do you upscale that? That's the problem. Well, what they've decided is, forget it. We're not going to upscale it by itself. What they've done is they've created a filter that they are saying will capture 99% of the PFAS in a volume of water.
Okay, because that was my original thing I was going to ask is their intention to purify water, have it degrade in water, and then you have you to be able to still drink the water, or are they extracting it and then degrading it?
So they're extracting and then degrading, because one of the problems was if you just extract it and have these little throwaway filters, now you have concentrations of PFAS. Now you've created a hazmat problem everywhere you've purified water. So we don't want but this is not the order in which it seems that this technology has come about. They've got the filter, and now they've got also the way to break it down separately. So it's not something you would necessarily have in a home filtration system, but it's something that could be upscaled and applied then to a water treatment plant.
Right.
So that before the water even gets to you, it's had the PFAS forever chemicals not just removed, but removed and then separately degraded.
That's amazing. This is great news.
The filters should be reusable, reconstitutable, because everything's just going to slide off of them eventually.
Yeah. No,
well, and as Hardjar says in the chat, water bill is going to go up, but you know what? I will take that for some years back on my life. So I am consuming less forever chemicals.
But it's a huge part of just the water system in general. We've got medications, we've got all sorts of manufacturing chemicals, we've got these forever chemicals. Let's make systems that can make the water as clean as possible for everybody.
Yes,
that's what we should be working towards. And this
in
sounds
theory,
great
you should be cleaning them at the water treatment plants before they go into municipal waterways to feed our faucets. They should also be going on the back end before they release treated water back into the ocean or into other waterways as well. Important. So you need it on both ends because people are still going to be using their Teflon pan to cook their eggs in the morning, and PFAS are still going to then end up in the waterways.
if they've got the old pants, if you got the old Teflon pants, throw them out because it's been banned for that, right? However, which I didn't know, all of your waterproofing rain jackets and things like this can still have those chemicals applied to them for waterproofing things.
I thought they were still on the inside of aluminum cans.
They're still on involved in a lot of food packaging.
Yeah.
Which is horrible.
Yeah.
The idea being, well, we've discovered there's a problem with them getting released because of high heat.
Right.
Which this is the whole story, and this is just utterly ridiculous because the chemists, I don't want to say which company because I don't want to get sued by a major corporate conglomerate thing if I get it wrong. But the researchers, when developing it, says, yeah, this is fine, totally stable and safe. Is ... as long as it's not exposed to high heat.
To high heat.
What do they do?
Yeah.
They put it on frying pans.
Frying pans.
Perfect.
Nobody will use these to cook at very high heats.
No.
No, they'll do it just right. Well, moving on from this actually very good news, hopeful news for the future of removing some of these terrible forever, not so forever chemicals from our environment. Let's talk about saber-toothed marsupial predators.
Picture, I'm hoping.
Well, we only have an illustration by...
Of course. An artist rendering, give me it.
An artist's rendering by the artist named Jorge Blanco. And this let me see if I can load it. Doesn't want to load it right now. But anyway, this Thylacosmilus. Thylacosmilus atrox is an extinct saber-toothed marsupial that enjoyed eating other living animals. It was an ambush predator. So it would hide, it would stalk its prey, it would ambush them when they had no way out. Okay, I'm not able to get that picture open. But these researchers found skulls of them and were like, well, they've got a really interesting skull. What's actually going on there? And in looking at the skulls of these Thylacosmilus atroxes, they discovered that the eye sockets, the orbital sockets for these animals, were oriented in a very, very strange way. So normally for predators, the eyes are frontally located so that the animal can really have binocular vision, be able to focus on whatever they're hunting, and be able to get them with accuracy. However, these old marsupials, turns out that the growth of the saber teeth out of their upper jaw pushed the orbital sockets
No.
out of the way.
No.
Yes, and so
No.
compared to other toothed predators of the time, Smilodon populator, Thylacoleo carnifex, and Thylacinus cynocephalus, they were able to determine that there was much less crossover in the front of the visual field than you would normally expect for a predator.
You know
And
what we
so-
usually say?
Ha.
Eyes in the front, go and hunt.
Yes.
Eyes on the side, go and hide.
Exactly. And so this predator, who's a hunter, has an eye socket orientation, and actually the eyes themselves, the way that the nerves would have gone in and the way that the orbital sockets were shaped, they're much more like cows or like a prey species than a predator species. And they survived for a really long time, so they still did a really good job. And so the researchers are basically saying, this study suggests that, maybe the old adage that the eyes have to be this particular way for predators is not necessarily true.
Well, and I suppose they could have their eyes could have been secondary. They could have been using other senses as their main detection
Absolutely.
for hunting, and especially if they're ambush predators, it's kind of all out the window because you don't really need the binocular vision to be able to figure out depth perception unless you're chasing something.
Right.
If you're just waiting for something to walk right in front of your face and jump out and grab it, you don't need precise vision.
And since they had very large fangs,
yeah,
I got you.
The other option could be that it had that binocular vision and evolved away from it because these looks like these forward teeth started to take up a lot of prominence in the front of the face and started to block the vision. Right?
Yes.
So now you've got now we've got it, right? If it's moved it out of the way. So they may have, and this would be impossible to test, incredible peripheral vision that is still allowing for that binocular aspect to be in full effect.
Well, so the binocular vision is you have to have overlap for binocular vision to work, because the whole idea of binocular vision is that it allows for the depth perception. So if it's all based on periphery, then you're not going to have overlap, and you won't be able to figure out.
But I'm saying if the eyes are pointing more out to the sides, that peripheral vision may overlap still, right? So you might,
so the peripheral vision does have
the center of vision.
Yeah,
or it
but
might
the peripheral vision. So in this particular species, there's an overlap at the front of the skull of they have a 35% visual field overlap versus other species which have 46, 50, 64%. But then the difference between where the eyes are focused on the top of the skull. So these saber teeth pushed the eyes back, and the eyes ended up kind of going up, and so there is like a 79% view upwards from the top, from the top of the skull surface upwards, compared to about 50% on the other species.
Which would make sense if you're an ambush predator, because if you're waiting for something to come and you're hiding in the bushes, that's perfect. But you know what other ambush predator has eyes on the side?
Which?
I'm going to show a picture if it's all right.
Yeah, I'd love to know. Who?
Ha! The crocodile.
The crocodile. And more on the top.
Predator. Yeah, they're more on the top, and there's no way they have very much overlap of these two little beady eyes. No way.
Interesting point.
I was also able to bring this up. I don't know if this was the picture that you were looking at before, but this is an artist's rendering of the saber-tooth marsupial, which I love.
It's a saber-tooth marsupial predator. I love it. Yeah, I love it so much. Weird in so many ways.
That's a very cool story. But my point about the crocodile is it's not completely unprecedented with predators. But if you think about like lions and dogs and wolves, you think about kind of your basic design for a hunter, you're absolutely right. You have those ones in the front. But for ambush predator, it makes a lot more sense to me for them to just...
I also think it's an amazing thing about marsupials, the convergent evolution. Like, there's a whole study on the extinct Tasmanian tiger, which if you look at this extinct creature, it looks like a canine. You would say this is a very strange kind of a dog. Maybe it's like closer to a hyena or something like this, but it's not. It's a predatory marsupial that convergently is very wolf-like. Just through convergent evolution.
It has a weird face, though. It has a much more marsupial face, looking kind of like Crash Bandicoot or something like that.
Well, no, if you look at it, but the overall skull is actually very close to a wolf's compared to a typical marsupial. It has that look, like, you can tell it's Australian anyway.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
It's got that Aussie, a little bit of a tough looking kangaroo stare, but the skull dimensions are actually much closer to the wolf. The body proportions are much closer to a wolf than any other marsupial, and it's been studied as this very interesting example of convergent evolution, pushing a design to an optimal predator design. Anyway,
Yeah, but the
this
great
is
thing,
like the saber-tooth tiger, completely unrelated to this thing that looks very much like you would assume, looking at that was some sort of saber-tooth cat relative. But it's complete. It's not.
It's not. Nope, it was a marsupial. But it goes to show that skull shape and features, there's the way that they worked and the way that, there's always some kind of trade-off. So the teeth got bigger, the eyes moved, but it was still in a way that this species was able to successfully hunt and attack its prey for, a very long time, even though it's no longer on the planet. At some point it failed, but in any case.
Yes. Maybe it was succeeding longer than us so far, though.
Right, I know. How long did it go? This is This Week in Science. Thank you for joining us for another episode of our science news talk show. We come here every week and love it if you are here too. And if you're going to come here and join us for science, please bring a friend. Tell some friends about This Week in Science today. Also, head over to twis.org and click on that Patreon link because your listener support is what keeps us going week after week, month after month. Thank you for your support. We can't do it without you. Time to come on back now to the last half hour of our show.
Half hour.
This Week in Science is wonderful. Blair's Animal Corner
With Blair
is up now.
She loves our creatures, great and small. Biped, millipede, no pet at all. If you want to hear about animals, she's your girl. Except for giant pandas and squirrels. There's Animal Corner.
got, Blair.
I want to tell you about animal personalities and how they can mess up science.
Because they've got personality. That's how I mess up Blair's Animal Corner.
Yeah, no, you're making it better. But several years ago, there was a researcher named Christian Rutz who was doing a study at University of St. Andrews in Scotland on New Caledonian crows, as we often like to talk about. And he was challenging them with puzzles made from natural materials before releasing them again. And in one test, they were faced with a log that had been drilled with holes that contained hidden food. They couldn't get the food out by bending by just with their beak, so they had to bend a plant stem into a hook. So we've talked about studies like this a million times with New Caledonian crows, right? And if the thing is, though, in order to make a sample set and for just the logistics of figuring out what it took for a crow to make tools, as a designer of a research experiment, you have to kind of make some decisions. And so one of the decisions that was made is that if a bird didn't try it within 90 minutes, they were removed from the data set. They were just like, nope, they're not going to mess with the log at all. Get them out of here. So that it sometimes could just be kind of chalked up to like outliers, or this crow's shy, so he doesn't want to do it, so we can't test his intelligence or whatever. But the more that that Christian Rutz looked at different animal tests and types of research on animal subjects, the more he realized that there's potentially this issue of personality that is confounding data sets. So in this case, he wasn't studying the skills of New Caledonian crows. He was studying the skills of a subset of New Caledonian crows that were quicker to approach a weird log.
Right.
And so the statistics he pulled from this data set maybe were not significant in the view of New Caledonian crows on the whole. So that means that he wanted to change his protocol. So he redid his study. He gave the more hesitant birds extra time. So if they didn't approach the log right away, he'd put them back away from the log for a couple days. They'd get used to being in captivity. They'd get used to their surroundings. They'd be let back out. They could try the puzzle again. many of these retested birds would start engaging with the log, and they could get good data from these individuals. So it's a reminder to treat these animals like individuals, just like we would with people. They have distinct tendencies, habits, life experiences. These could all affect how they perform in an experiment. They're not, equations or something that you can kind of distill down to one variable if you're collecting animals from the wild. And so this is kind of an idea to change the way that animal behavior studies are done into a new method called STRANGE. STRANGE is an acronym, as you might imagine.
Either that or the researchers are just strange.
I mean, both can be true. And so STRANGE considers several factors about animal studies: social background, trapability and self-selection, rearing history, acclimation and habituation, natural changes in responsiveness, genetic makeup, and experience. STRANGE. So
I always feel whenever one of those comes together like that, I'm like, okay, which one or two of those did you throw in there?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Which one did you have to change the wording for to make it spell something fun? But you know what? It's fun. Yeah. So an example of that. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's just also like I don't know. Maybe like it's my inherent laziness, but. How long does it take to trap a crow, catch one of these wild crows in the first place? I'm only going to give it 90 minutes? That's like trying to do this show in 90 minutes. Hey, it's going to be a whole week before we do another show. We got to, take what you got now. Go with it.
Uh-huh. Well, so speaking of trapability, an example of adjusting a study to not bias towards trapability. If you're catching fish, if you use a mesh, a stationary mesh, you're only going to get fish that are the most active, or the ones that slam into the mesh. But if you use a net that you manipulate and pull through a school of fish, you're going to get a more even distribution of individuals. So that's trapability. There are pheasants that if you house them in groups of 5 and do an experiment, or you house them in groups of 3 and do an experiment, they perform differently. They actually do better if they're in groups of 5. So that's their social background. That has to do with how they're comfortable. Jumping spiders raised in captivity are less interested in prey than wild spiders. Rearing history. Honeybees learn best in the morning. Natural changes in responsiveness. So there's all these different things that you need to keep into consideration. And I was immediately reminded of the study that I keep bringing back up because I think it's one of my favorite studies we've ever talked about on the show, that lab mice are cold. So that is an environmental impact on a study species, right? So these are all things that you have to consider. Are some of these mice just better at performing in the cold than others, right? So this strange factors idea will hopefully kind of percolate through future animal research so that we make sure that we're studying actual representative sets of species and not a specific subset of a species.
Right, and so that you're actually getting to the answers of the questions that you're asking.
Yes.
I think I've told this story before, but probably not for a very long time. I had a high school job in an orthopedic research lab at UC Davis, and I was there, and my desk was right next to the cages where they had these mice that were recovering from a surgery where the aorta was cut and then sutured up with this tiny, tiny needle under a microscope, and the survival rate had been around 20%. So the concern was maybe they weren't that good with the needle yet. Maybe this wasn't a procedure that they would want to use for other things. It went up to 100% survival rate after I started working there. And the reason was...
You changed the protocol.
I was accidentally changing the protocol because the little mice post-surgery were down at the bottom of the cage, and the food was in a tray suspended at the top. You know, they'd put it just in the top, and they'd have to come up and nibble between the bars to get the food. And they weren't getting out. So I would take some of my crackers, tuna sandwich, and I'd drop it down to the bottom.
You messed with the research.
I didn't know that was part of the experiment. I was like, oh, they need to recover. I'll just help them out a little bit. And they're not getting up to get their food. And it was 100% survival. And at first, the researchers was like, yeah, we're trying to figure out what happened and change. And then one's just like,
what's his food in here?
The new kid is over there. The new kid is like, hey, I got a question for you, kid. Huh? Oh, yeah. I give
You've been messing with the mice?
Every time. Yeah, I've been helping them out. Yeah, they're doing much better now. But it was just the recovery area for the mice, just the cages. The way it was designed, they weren't getting to their food.
They couldn't get their food.
They were feeling too weak to get up and get the food, and that changed the entire outcome of the study. It was that little bit of accidental animal husbandry protocol.
So the strange should also be a strange J, just to make
strange
sure
J,
the Justin factor. But yeah,
sure.
but that's a huge point. Yeah, it's a question. Fred Gage started asking years and years ago about enrichment and how does enrichment affect the behavior of animals. Rat mouse cages in research labs were barren, sterile for such a long time. And now we know that it's great to let them have places to hide and give them bedding and give them toys to play with and
give them some novel food sometimes.
Yeah. So there's all sorts of things that, I hope this strange framework becomes more accepted and gets picked up around research labs, because it is the kind of thing that it's better for the animal, better for the research, better for everything. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
It occurs to me that this must also be occurring in humans.
Yes. Well, I mean, we've talked about that a lot, right? Like, who shows up for studies? First of all, that's trappability right there.
Trappability of humans.
From in
yes.
surveys?
Self-selection.
Who are we hearing from?
Are you getting all the extroverts?
Outspoken?
Yeah, exactly.
We're just not hearing from any of those quiet extroverts or those shyer people, or those people who just don't want to be bothered.
Well, until you start forcibly getting people to include themselves in studies, and and that's not. Anyway, speaking of lab mice, let's talk about mice some more. I want to talk about mice that are pee shy.
What is that?
Yeah, it's exactly what it sounds like. So mice communicate in many ways, but one of the ways that they communicate, specifically males quite a bit, is through chemical signaling, aka marking, aka peeing intentionally in places. Yes. Right. And so a new method of tracking where mice pee and when through thermal imaging. So you get to actually see, because the pee is warm when it comes out, right? So you get to see through thermal imaging when they're peeing, because they pee like teeny tiny little baby little dots. So if you've ever held a mouse in your hand and it's peed in your hand, which, I have experienced that, you can barely even tell, because it's just like, it's like a little dropper it's like a pipette full of water. It's like so tiny. But through the thermal imaging, they can catch it. And so through thermal recordings, researchers at Cornell were able to track when, where, and why mice scent mark. And they found that mice that recently lost a fight became pee shy, while victors increased their frequency of marking. So basically like, yeah, I won. I'm the cock of the walk. I'm going to pee everywhere. This is my space. And then, the other one's like, oh, I lost. I don't want people to know where I am because they know that I'm weak. So I'm not going to pee. And so it's interesting because this is a social signaling management system, but it also is a metabolic management system, because pee is metabolically costly. Do you use energy to fuel your body, to make muscle, or do you use energy to create urine to continually pee out over time, right? So there's a push-pull. You don't want to do it too much. If you do it a lot, but there's a benefit, then, there might be a good thing to that. But also, you have to do it some because that's the main way of communicating. And they found that if males lost and they didn't pee, so if you looked at all the males that lost social kind of fights with other males, the ones that peed less had less success with mates because they weren't marking. The ones that peed slightly more than that had more success, but they all peed less as a result of losing, right? So it's like you have to recognize, okay, I don't want to pee too much, but I don't want to pee too little. It's like a very difficult balance to figure out exactly how much and when and how to scent mark.
But is there a difference between the urination as scent marking and just the bodily function of having to go?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and I think that my guess is the way they didn't go into that in the study too much, but my guess is that the way the thermal imaging worked is you could tell the difference between a mark and just like a release because it would be larger.
Right.
But it's also just possible that they don't really need to do a whole lot of larger peeing because they mark so much. So,
well, yeah, I mean, just that little clip of thermal imaging that was available there made it look like mice are peeing all the time.
Yeah, they kind of are.
All the time.
Yes, absolutely. And so that's what they looked at in the study. So some males hold it in a little longer and a little more frequently as a result of losing. But it also impacts future fights. So the lower peeing males that won fights had a more difficult time winning. The mice that fought them were less willing to surrender to weak signalers. So there's also, you don't want to over advertise your presence because everyone knows you're a loser, but you don't want to under advertise or you'll never win a fight again.
I have a feeling, and this is just pure Justin speculation, that this study has been overthought, and the real result is that being better hydrated makes you better at mouse fights.
I don't know. I'm thinking that the outcome of this, you want, if you're going to have mice in your house as pets, you're going to want to have the loser mice. Especially if you're going to let them out of their cages at all.
Having a mouse as a pet is just tough.
I'm just saying. I know.
It's a lot of work. Don't really like to be held. Honestly, a rat is better as a pet.
I love
anyway, that's a huge sideline. But ultimately, this study, aside from just being bizarre, is a good model to start to look at to build kind of rules for animals that use social signals. So basically looking at the rules that they use to make decisions to kind of optimize social signaling with the costs associated. So how do you understand how evolution has optimized the effort to produce and broadcast social information in the recognition that broadcasting that social information is costly? So this is, you could do this in a bunch of other ways. Like there are animals that do social signaling that also make them vulnerable to predators.
Exactly.
Think about calls, think about bright colorations, right? So you could apply this kind of similar model to other species in a very similar way. It'd be interesting to see if there are kind of trends, I guess, beyond just the pea shy mice.
There probably are trends, but yeah, it'd be interesting to see how they line up, how it all works out.
And then do a parallel where they're testing all those on hydration level.
Yes,
exactly.
You can't. It's like get a good sleep and stay hydrated. Are two of those things that you should always be doing.
Hey, Justin, do you want to tell us about other things that we're finding out about that make our brains and bodies work?
Yeah, so this is actually, this story is interesting, but it's also, I like the way that it is laid out by the researchers here. This is researchers at Wuhan University, which I believe is in China. They have found a previously unknown mechanism connecting gut microbiota to depression, and specifically in women. So what they were working on was there's an understanding that there's a connection between an estrogen, estradiol, thank you. Estradiol, which is the most prominent estrogen in women of reproductive age. There has been in the past noticed a correlation between having low estradiol levels and depression. So these researchers decided to go and check the microbiota of women with, well, first they did blood tests. First it starts with blood tests. And it turned out that in the blood tests, though this is all pre-menopausal women because things change later. The women with depression had 43% lower estradiol in their blood system. So
okay,
that was a pretty significant hit right away to be, interrogating. Now, the way that it gets into the blood system is this is produced by the liver, and it ends up in the gut, and then it works its way into the blood system from the gut. So, where do you go from checking the blood? You go to the gut. And they checked the gut microbiota samples from 2 groups of women, one with depression and the low estradiol levels, and the ones without. And they've showed that within 2 hours, estradiol degraded by 77.8% in the guts of women with depression, and only 19.3% in the non-depression group. So this result means...
What's happening?
Yeah, something's degrading it. So the assumption then isn't, maybe this is not an issue of lack of production of estradiol in the first place. Something is degrading it before it can get to the bloodstream. So then the researchers went to mice. They did a mouse study, and they introduced this microbiome to the mice and found a 25% decrease in estradiol levels in the blood of the mice who had been given the depressed microbiota. Okay, so now they sort of confirmed their link, their association with this gut microbiota and estradiol levels. So the next thing they needed to do, what in the microbiota is doing it? And so they ran some more testing and isolations, and they narrowed it down to a single enzyme. So then what do you got to do? You got to put that enzyme in the mice. So they went back to the mouse study, and they put the enzyme by itself in the mouse and to see if it would have the same effect, and it did. And in fact, I think in this case it might have been even they saw maybe a larger decrease in the amount of estradiol that was making it into the blood. Okay,
so now we have something where we can make more women depressed. Is that what this is? Wait.
That's not the moral of the story.
Is that the take-home message?
So what they had done, though, is they had narrowed it down to this enzyme that can degrade estradiol. They narrowed it down to a specific bacteria that could do it. So actually, I skipped a step. So I messed up the whole story. They narrowed it down to, before they got down to the enzyme, they narrowed it down to a specific bacteria and introduced bacteria, and those rates decreased. And then they went to the directly to the enzyme, and that did it also. So now they've got it pretty narrowed down. They've also, from some genome searching, found that there's maybe 3 gut microbiota that can produce this enzyme that breaks down estradiol. They also checked and I gotta look it up. The estrone, which is the byproduct once the estradiol has been broken down, to see if those levels had any effect, and they did not. Just introducing estrone to mice had no effect on the blood levels. So it is the degrading itself, the reduction of the lack of estradiol that's been degraded by this enzyme that has. So then what do we got? Now we know potential therapeutic pathways. We know they also did a side piece where they had introduced the microbe responsible, and then they had the control, and then they had a third group that they also gave a antibiotic to, and they found that the group that had the troublesome microbe but also was given an antibiotic, which basically just nullified it, worked. So it's possible that an antibiotic targeting this specific microbe could potentially reduce depression in some women. It's key.
But it has to be a very targeted antibiotic because you can also mess up somebody's other systems by getting rid of other beneficial microbiota, right? And that can also cause depression.
Yeah, and the antibacterial resistance that we're getting, that is a huge problem. It seems like unless they could have something incredibly targeted, that wouldn't be the way to go. But the other direction would be, how can we, increase other populations of bacteria that might be good, that would displace the bad?
Oh, you go.
Is there diet? Right. Are there dietary or, I don't know, exercise? Are there things that people could do once you find that this is a thing, that this, that would change those populations without requiring a medication? Or do you just supplement with more and more and more estradiol? I do know that there's research pre-menopause that iron levels, so if you have more iron in your diet, that can influence estradiol levels versus progesterone levels. And so there are nutrient components of our diets, fiber, other things that can have significant effects on things like estradiol levels. So fascinating to be able to target it to like a few species of bacteria.
But this was Klebsiella aerogenes, I guess is the strain of bacteria. Regardless of what you're talking about, though, is like you can feed that gut microbiota that may be altering activity for a little bit, but if this microbiota is there and being active and is degrading the thing you need, even if you're taking supplements, it could be attaching it.
Yeah.
We don't like to say that antibiotics is a great thing for everybody to be on, but it might be one of those things to talk to your doctor about if you can get a microbiota sample if you've been suffering from depression, to see if this could be trying, because then a hard antibiotic treatment that you can get through in a couple of weeks, if it can impact long-term mental health, which is also this is the thing that occurs to me too. It's like, how many years of therapy? Of word talking, thinking, assuming that everything is brain-centered, behavior-centered, experience-centered, in all of our manifestations of problems and depression, that it's all in your head, literally. And then it can turn out that, no, you have a hormonal imbalance because
it's all in your stomach.
That's
in your gut.
Your hormones that you need for mood stability.
Yeah.
Oh, well then, what did I do in therapy? Well, you got to get a lot of stuff out of the closet that you needed to, but that didn't help, did it? No. Okay, well then, let's get to the physical root of an actual hormonal imbalance.
Treating the symptom, not the cause in that case.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So it's just another feather in the cap for the idea of running microbiome panels consistently throughout your life as part of your healthcare.
It needs to happen. All sorts, hormone, microbiome, like all sorts of baseline panels, just to get it.
And if your health system is introducing, a lot of mental health access, that's great. But maybe some of those dollars should be going to exactly what you're saying, Blair, of getting a microbiome profile, so we can take those things that we now know are sourced in the gut and separate them from the psychology, mental health arena completely.
Well, they could
It
do
doesn't-
two things.
They both can be happening. Yeah, it doesn't have to be separated entirely.
I'm pretty sure
because
most healthcare industries have enough money to do both.
do all the things.
Yeah.
Well, which one are they going to do first? Because come on.
But what if? But
why
what
are
if?
they
But,
doing everything all
but
at
what if it's not something that's your healthcare industry? But what if it's a parasite that's floating around in the water?
So this is, you're talking about there's 4 sea otters that got stranded in California and died, were examined. And they turned out to have an unusually severe form of toxoplasmosis, the disease caused by friend of the show, I guess, Toxoplasma gondii. This is a California Department of Fish and Wildlife and the University of California in Davis. Scientists warn that this is a very rare strain, previously never reported in an aquatic animal and not seen in California before. They published this in the journals Frontier and Marine Science. They say it's very aggressive. The researchers looking at the inundation of this parasite throughout fatty tissues, or throughout tissues throughout these otters, say they've never seen the lesions like this in any toxoplasma case before. And incredibly, it's not in the brain, which is a very normal place for a typical Toxoplasma gondii to get through the blood-brain barrier and change behaviors, by colonizing the brain a little bit.
Yeah, but that's usually they end up in the brain and they become the cyst, right? It's like they lay eggs, change their form, or they go into a dormant cyst state in the brain, and that's what changes things.
Because it's the cysts that actually do the traveling. So the parasite's stays in the gut, but it's the thing that's supposed to become eggs doesn't happen without a specific enzyme in the gut. Here we go again. So cats lack this one enzyme that normally will somehow prevent in any other mammal prevents these gamete cells of this parasite from becoming eggs. So then you get these weird little differentiated from what would become an egg cells that go traveling throughout
the oocytes.
Having these strange effects. So, but it's not in the brain. So this isn't a behavioral change that caused them to die. This is fatty tissue inflammation that was so severe that these poor sea otters didn't make it. We don't know what this is. So what do? You test the DNA of the strain of Toxoplasma. And it got a big hit with something called Coog, a strange strain of Toxoplasma. Was there in all 4 cases. And this strain had been previously identified. All the way back in 1995, Canadian mountain lions had been the vector for an outbreak of an aggressive form of Toxoplasma gondii. And this was the strain that the Canadian mountain lions had. So
traveled a far way.
Yeah, this is Karen Shapiro of the UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine quoted, "This was a complete surprise. The Coog genotype," and she probably didn't say it like that, but maybe. The Coog genotype has never before been described in sea otters nor anywhere in the California coastal environment or in any other aquatic mammal or bird. So they're sort of issuing a pretty big warning here because, of course, Toxoplasma gondii, or toxoplasmosis, can affect mammals. Mm-hmm. If it's in the marine environment, it could move up food chain. Moving up food chain means it could get into house pets, humans, foods, all
seafood,
sorts of things.
Yeah.
And because this is such an aggressive form that didn't migrate to the brain, but is creating this massive fatty tissue inflammation, the researchers are putting out a pretty big warning for a monitoring effort to make sure that this doesn't climb the food ladder.
Yeah, because even though we know that there are health impacts that are significant from Toxoplasma gondii as we have known it, this seems like it would be much more impactful. Even though, I mean, it's so strange. It's like, oh, behavioral changes. So, okay, we can kind of deal with that.
Well, except that could also mean, in extreme cases, that also means a schizophrenia diagnosis.
Right.
When it's
Well,
actually
and
Toxoplasma
it can
gondii.
also cause miscarriages in the
Cause
first
miscarriages.
trimester.
That's why you have the
and-
warnings
and
on
pregnant
kitty
women, yeah.
litter. It's not because the kitty litter is hazardous.
I do wonder, though, if the, if this being a much more virulent, not virulent, but it's not a virus, it's a parasite, but fast acting, getting into the fatty tissues, not ending up in the brain, it's not going to change the behavior of animals much, but maybe it kills them really fast. And so maybe that in itself is not so if these animals are dying more rapidly, then maybe they won't be spreading it as much.
Right. But I think what's scary is what sea otters eat and how they probably got it, which is in marine invertebrates, which everything eats marine invertebrates, including us. So it's
in restaurants, you can get your uncooked mussels.
Your oysters, your shrimp. Yeah. So that's, I think, the thing about this that scared me is that they're not eating mice, they're not eating cats, they're eating marine invertebrates, and it's enough in the marine invertebrates that there's bioaccumulation and that they had this impact. So that's spooky to me.
It is spooky. It's very spooky.
We're just gonna have to eat our 3D printed pizza and
sounds great.
And go to bed. We're not gonna be able to eat just normal food anymore because we've ruined it all.
Oh gosh. Well, you said pizza though, right?
3D printed pizza. I don't know how good it tastes.
You can have vegetarian pizza. It's out there. Whatever. Anyway, moving on from threats to our ecosystems and the animals that live in them. Let's talk about how we are improving our technology to be able to look into places where we haven't been able to look into before. Yes, researchers have just published in Nature Communications 2 papers. This is the second of 2 papers describing their technological advancement of being able to stick a little tiny miniature microscope into mouse spinal cords to be able to image the glial cells, the astroglial cells, and active neurons while the mice were wearing the microscopes. Yeah, so it's a really cool setup. They're tiny and they have this little teeny tiny little, they're wearable. So they're like as big as a finger kind of thing. They're little tiny cameras and the microscope stuff is all in the outside. And then they insert a tube into the area of the spinal cord that they want to image, and then they have a prism that is involved in it's involved in multiplying the light to be able to increase the resolution and be able to get all of the colors and not just 1 or 2 colors. And so they're able to go into the spinal cord and inject neurons with certain dyes and the astroglial cells with other color dyes, and then pull on the mouse tails or pinch the mouse tails to make them feel a painful or somewhat painful stimulus, and then they could actually see the changes in the spinal cord as the mice were experiencing the stimulus. It's a very exciting advancement. Like they say that the camera itself, it's bigger than your bigger than your little, or not bigger, smaller than your little finger. They're able to get a really great resolution. And so it's a very exciting advancement, because not only do we potentially want to be looking at mouse spinal cords, but we could potentially start looking at human spinal cords or other places that are brains that are difficult to look into. Yes.
How do we think it feels to have this contraption on you?
I have no idea. It feels great.
Oh,
it was wonderful.
You got right this, but it's like acupuncture. Oh, it's perfect right there. That's where I needed you to put
like acupuncture when I tried it. Anyway, I'm just curious about that, because everything's nice and tiny for the mouse, but I feel like I don't know.
Right. But so this is, we talk about image sensors on cameras and how, you have your multiple CCDs to be able to get the different colors and everything. But because of the prism that they're implanting as well, they're able to get, this compound lens that they've created, they are able to have multiple colors that they image, so that they can look at these different areas of the neurons and be able to actually see stuff happen in real time and be able to understand more about things like the astrocyte involvement in transmitting messages about pain down and through the spinal cord. Because normally we think, these astrocytes are like packing material, or that's what, years and years ago, that's how they were kind of referred to. They're just like support cells for the neurons. The neurons are the ones that do the big transmission of information. But with this, they were actually able to really show that these glial cells were actively involved in the transmission of the signal down the spinal cord. So I don't know. Maybe this is the kind of thing that we can look at to be able to see how neurons and if neurons are recovering from spinal injury. Maybe this is the kind of thing that we can actually start seeing how astrocytes become involved in repair processes in the spinal cord. And like you said, Justin, maybe different places in the brain. And with this technology, they stick this little teeny tiny camera in, and I was like, what do you do? How do you get this picture? You're not slicing the spinal cord open.
Yeah.
They say it's minimal damage to the spinal cord. So minimal. The tissue,
that's not nothing.
It's not nothing, but at the same time, it's, it allows them to do the work so that they can have an active animal that has this little camera. It's wearing this little camera, and you can record images of changes to the neurons and the astrocytes and see how things work during different time periods. Yeah. So I thought it was very exciting, because I mean, really, how do you look inside a spinal cord or a brain without cutting it open?
Yeah. Until now, you don't.
Until now.
What would be really interesting, because this is specifically, we're talking spinal cord here and being able to see the activities going on, would be experiments with the pluripotent cells that, if we're not talking about a repair mechanism, we could be viewing repair mechanisms, very important, but seeing, trying to force regeneration of new cells, the new connections, and being able to observe those could tell us what's working, what's not working, how to adjust, so that we could be talking about, as much as this is just an optical technology in the moment, as a research tool, this may allow for further down the road, of course, the pathway of the thing, how medical research works.
Yeah.
A cure to spinal injuries.
Exactly. We can understand these processes a lot better. Yeah. Understand how the cells work together, understand how they signal with each other, how the, signal transmission process takes place. There's a lot of, and
when you've learned those things, then you can figure out how to hack it. So that you can make repairs what the body can't.
And then you can be Dr. What is his name?
Otto Octavius.
Octavius, Dr. Octavius, with all your arms attached to your spinal cord, and yes, we'll have all these things.
This is why I don't go outside.
You got to attach it just right though, or you'll go crazy and evil.
Yeah, you don't want to do that.
No.
That's why we need to do all the mouse the mouse
Now,
microscope
prevent
backpacks now.
Doc Ock from happening. I get it.
Exactly. Thank you.
Now I
Yes,
understand.
Blair.
Okay, got it.
You get me. I know you.
Glad we have research mice working on this.
Yeah. So another study, my last one for the night, nothing to do with mice, only to do with people and how we communicate and how our brains are involved in communication. There have been lots of studies that have looked at speech areas in the brain, how the brain is wired for speech, and we've got things like Broca's area and other parts of the brain. We've got the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere that are involved in different aspects of speech comprehension versus speech production, and being able to understand how all this works and how the brains are wired up, how anyone's brain is wired up for language is a really fascinating question that researchers have been trying to figure out more about for a very long time. And in this particular study that was just published in Neuroimage, researchers have compared the brains of native German speakers and native Arabic speakers. The reason that they have compared these two particular language types is that German is very what they call morphosyntactically complex. And if anybody has ever tried to learn German or experienced words like Farfignugan or other things, it's like there are lots of parts of words that are put together to create words. And so it's a very fascinating language in that the construction of words is very specific, and there are very specific parts.
They have this, and it's additive thing where you have two small words and you put them together and make a new word. That's and unfortunately they introduced this concept to the Greenlandic Inuits, who just kept rolling. They didn't have like a length cleavage aspect to their language creation. So you have these 30 character long words now in Greenlandic Inuit language because they just kept rolling with this additive anyway,
so German is like that. It's derived, it's Indo-European. Arabic is a Semitic language, and as opposed to being flexible with its word order, it is very specific with its word order, and it is a root-based system. So the researchers say most words are morphologically complex, characterized by a rich non-linear or non-concatenative morphological structure, and the words are derived from a root and the word pattern. So there's a lot of aspects to the way, the context of the words and where they come together. And there's a specific aspect. The root usually consists of 3 or 4 consonants and provides the core semantic meaning or the semantic family, while the word pattern is a fixed template composed mostly of vowels with slots for consonants. Fascinating just on its own. So it's this pattern of consonants and vowels that it's like a skeleton that makes up the information of the words. Very different from the way the Germanic language works. So they're like, all right, we know these languages are very, very different. And so let's put native German speakers and native Arabic speakers into an fMRI machine and see what we can find. And they hypothesized that there would be differences. And yes, indeed, there were differences. What they found is that the Germanic language tended to be strongerly, that's my new language.
That's a great word. I understood exactly what you meant by it.
You did.
No, I believe it's more strongerly.
Strongerly.
That would be the more traditionally correcter.
had greater connectivity within the left hemisphere of the brain, but there was a lot of activity on the right as well, because there's also, the various understanding and processing that goes on, but it's not as connected across the brain. Whereas with Arabic, they discovered that there was a lot of connectivity of the network across the hemispheres of the brain. So there was, instead of being mostly active in the left hemisphere, there was pretty much equal activity in the left and the right. So what this suggests, and what we've thought for a very long time this supports, is that the language that you grow up speaking affects the development of your brain and the networks within the brain. And so to take this to an even, a different perspective is, because of this, it's affecting the wiring of your brain. And this is also going to impact the way you think, how you do things. This has, very interesting implications for just the way that the brain works. Not that one is better than another, but that it's fascinating that there are these differences that show up so specifically for basically the different morphologies, if you could use the morphology of a language.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Different languages, different brain connections.
Yeah, and I bet that you could also do something similar along the lines of looking at the active brain of somebody who's thinking about and involved in computer coding, or a musician, or because these are also forms of language that are accessing different portions of the brain.
Right. But this is, so the interesting question that they're going to be looking into further is, now they're going to, the Arabic speakers, the study took place in Germany. The Arabic speakers were people who had recently moved to Germany, didn't speak German yet, but they're going to be taking German lessons. And so most people, their language abilities crystallize between the ages of about 11 to 13 years old. You can still learn languages for your whole life, but it gets harder.
So much harder.
Right. And so this is, now they're interested in the developmental versus the influential impacts of learning. So these people who are now learning German, who learned Arabic before, will this change the way that their brain is connected, or will their brains remain connected in the same way? And so I think that those are the interesting questions they're going to be looking at next. It's like nature versus nurture of the brain, but it's all nurture because it's language. But anyway,
I want them to map a bunch of languages now.
right?
Because they
see
found
them
these
all.
very specific things about these very specific languages, but
Yeah.
there's other crazy things about other languages and the way they're developed and the way their words are formed and the way sentences are formed, and they all have these very different rules. So I would love to see how all these different languages map out on a brain. And Marie mentions in the chat room, it would be really cool to see somebody who was raised in a multilingual household.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't really have a dominant language, or if they did, they grew up speaking multiple languages, to see if you then, is it an overlap of the two or more languages if you just have them on their own? Like, oh man, brains, they're so
and
we don't understand them at all.
Fascinating.
And I know that science isn't going to do this for me, but I would like to find out, after Blair's follow-up studies, what the best language is for the human brain, and just agree to all learn that, whatever it happens to be. No prejudging, no saying only if it's or if it's that. Whatever the best one is, even if we all have to learn how to make click sounds, whatever the best one is, we should just agree on one language and all speak that going forward.
Oh, well,
That's
what
all
I
right.
think
Standardization.
Oh, you're going for standardization. Okay, well, I was thinking more along the lines of, if all of the languages influence brain development in various ways and change the morphological and processing demands of the brain, then really we all just need to learn all languages. And that would probably be best for the brain.
I'd
It
love
would
that.
be, but then you have important research papers that are being published in multiple languages and may not have access to. So it just helps to have a standard second language. Maybe I should put it that way. So you still have that stochastic human thinking throughout the world.
You're pushing for Esperanto again, aren't you?
No, I don't want that one either. I want I kind of want it to be one of the ones where you make clicky sounds. I think that would be fun.
Ooh, Hardjar says sign language. Yes.
Yeah.
Very cool.
That would, interesting as well. But that's also different because it's motor. And so it's
it would be completely different
language areas and motor mapping. Yeah.
Right. So sign language is language dependent. So there's American Sign Language.
I'm terrible at sign language. Because I was a horrible speller as a youth, and so even though if I learned all the letters, nobody understood me. I was like, I must not know my letters. I knew the letters and the gestures okay. I just couldn't spell the words.
Yeah.
Anyway, did we do it?
It's all good. I think we did it. I think we've come to the end of another episode. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for another episode of This Week in Science. As always, I would love to thank a number of people. Thank you to my co-hosts for this wonderful show. Thank you to Fada for helping with social media and the show notes that go out on YouTube. Thank you to Identity4 for recording the show. Gord, Arenlore, others who are involved in keeping our chat rooms great places. Thank you for your work doing that. And thank you to everyone in the chat rooms. Love seeing you here chatting all over the place. And everyone who is a Patreon sponsor, thank you for helping to support this show. Thank you to Teresa Smith, James Schaefer, Richard Badge, Kent Northcote, Rick Loveman, George Corris, Pierre Velazar, John Ratnaswamy, Carl Kornfeld, Karen Tazi, Chris Wozniak, Dave Bunn, Vegard Shefstad, Hal Snyder, Donathan Styles, a.k.a. Don Stylo, Aldi Coffin, Reagan, Don Mundus, Stephen Alberon, Daryl Myshak, Stu Pollock, Andrew Swanson, Fredos104, Sky Luke, Paul Ronovich, Kevin Reardon, Noodles, Jack, David E. Youngblood, Sean, Clarence, Lamb, John McKee, Greg Riley, Mark Essenflow, Steve Leisman, a.k.a. Zima, Ken Hayes, Howard Tan, Christopher Rappin, Richard, Brendan Minish, Johnny Gridley, Remy Day, Flying Out, Christopher Dreyer, Artyom, Greg Briggs, John Atwood, Rudy Garcia, Dave Wilkinson, Rodney Lewis, Paul, Rick Ramus, Philip Shane, Kurt Larson, Craig Landon, Sue Doster, Jason Olds, Dave Neighbor, Eric Knapp, E.O., Adam Mishkan, Kevin Parachan, Aaron Luthen, Steve Bell, Bob Calder, Marjorie Paul, Disney, David Simmerly, Patrick Pecoraro, and Tony Steele. Thank you. Thank you so much for your support. And if you want to help support us on Patreon, head over to twis.org and click on the Patreon link. On next week's show,
we will be back Wednesday, 8 p.m. Pacific Time, broadcasting live from our YouTube and Facebook channels and from TWIS, twis.org/live?
Yes. Do you want to listen to us as a podcast? Perhaps while you're fighting off a fever on the couch? Just search for This Week in Science wherever podcasts are found. If you enjoyed the show, get your friends to subscribe as well.
For more information on anything you've heard here today, show notes, links to stories will be available on our website, www.twis.org. Is it org?
It is. Always has been.
It is. We're an org. Well, we also might have a newsletter eventually.
You can also contact us directly. Email Kiki at Kirsten@thisweekinscience.com, Justin at twistmedian@gmail.com, or me, Blair, at blairbaz@twis.org. Just be sure to put TWIS, TWIS, in the subject line, or your email will be translated into a language that none of us can read, and we'll never know what you're trying to tell us.
However, if you can use emojis, you can direct them towards our Twitter, where we are at TWIScience, at Dr. Kiki, at JacksonFly, and at Blair's Menagerie. We love your feedback. If there's a topic you would like us to cover or address, a suggestion for an interview, a haiku that comes during the night, please let us know.
We'll be back here again next week, and we hope you'll join us then for more great science news.
And if you learned anything from the show, remember,
it's all in your head.
This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science, it's the end of the world. So I'm setting up shop, got my banner unfurled. It says the scientist is in, I'm gonna sell my advice. Show them how to stop the robots with a simple device. I'll reverse global warming with a wave of my hand. And all it'll cost you is a couple of grand. 'Cause this week's science is coming your way. So everybody listen to what I say. I use the scientific method for all that it's worth. And I'll broadcast my opinion all over the earth. 'Cause it's This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 I've got one disclaimer and it shouldn't be news. That what I say may not represent your views, but I've done the calculations.
And the show is over. Oh my goodness. Welcome to the after the show, everybody.
After the show.
After the show. It's the after show.
Go ahead and help yourself to the hors d'oeuvres. Be cautioned with the chicken. It was actually put out before the show started, which was a long time ago. We did a couple of hours. There. I always like to think that we're just making sure the poor Rachel has enough content to edit together a show.
Oh.
Yeah.
You know,
Is that it?
You wouldn't want I got to cut all this out, but then the show is too short. I have to leave in the nonsense part that Justin's babbling on. This way we talk long enough, I think.
Are you on? Did you have time change this week, or are you still
no,
at 3:30?
that was last time, and it still hasn't changed.
So you're
but
still
it will this weekend. I'll get.
What time? What time is it now? Like 5?
It's 6.
6. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Ouch.
It'll be, and if it's next week though, it would be 7. So then everything's a little bit more physiological. Because I had to get up at, what is it? Time o'clock? 3 o'clock in the morning. Which 3 o'clock in the morning.
I appreciate it. That's crap.
Is I think just barely the next day. Like 2:30 at night is still yesterday.
Yeah, I agree.
2:30 in the morning is yesterday, but 3 is starting to get. You know, I really feel like the new day starts at like 4 in the morning. Actually, I'm gonna take it back. That 3 in the morning is still yesterday. It's in that in between where you either shouldn't have gotten up this early or should have been in bed already. 3 in the morning is a time when nobody should be awake.
Witching hour, right?
But it's where my alarm was set on it, kind of having to get to the show because you do the daylight savings time at a different week over there in what is it, America?
This place.
And then we do it in Europe. So.
Yes, we have. A lot of pain, but
How you
at
doing, Blair?
least you made it.
I'm okay. Taking it one day at a time, baby.
Good. That's what we should all do. Oh,
Yeah.
Fada's gonna go watch some television.
That's nice.
Some good shows. That sounds fantastic. Thank you, Fada. Have a good night. Did we see the CME last week? I personally did not see. I'm guessing by CME, the coronal mass ejection. That was massive. I didn't see it.
You're a coronal mass ejection.
I hope not.
Well, I didn't even hear about it.
Yeah, apparently there was big giant dark spot on the sun. What was it?
That explains how I missed it.
Yeah. Because you're not supposed to stare at the sun. Come on, everybody.
Don't stare for too long.
stare at the sun for very long. Yes, March 12th. It was massive. Yes, Harjar. Yeah.
What's amazing is for the people who did see it, they can still see the spots in front of their eyes now.
It's amazing.
You know what? March 12th. I think I had my own mass ejection that day.
No, I don't want to dig into that any deeper.
Blair?
That had to do with why I missed the show last week.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know where that news is. I saw a picture. There's a big black spot on the sun several days ago. There was. Yeah. Don't stare at the sun. Just look at the nice non-AI produced images on the internet that come with the news stories. Yes.
Yeah, I've been. Oh gosh, all the AI stories that have been popping up into my news feeds lately. They've just been.
At a certain point, you just have to
hilarious.
go. No, thank you. I'm not going to look anymore.
Oh no! I'm finding it. I'm finding it incredibly fascinating because, I mentioned a disclaimer. Everything that we do, basically as humans, even the study we were just talking about, everything is so language based. Mm-hmm. Like if you think about all of the people in offices who are making phone calls or typing up, preparing documents or doing anything are just word generating. We generate words, tremendous volume for moving economies and society along. And if we don't do that anymore at some point, if that gets taken over, the whole word generation and word interpretation
help centers, right? Call
but
centers.
There's a huge problem. There's a huge problem with that. And I was watching an AI expert on YouTube through Wired. They have basically tech support, but then they change it into whatever, right? And so it was AI support. And he was talking about there's a huge problem with AI that we're not going to lose anytime soon. In fact, we might have to go back to the drawing board with AI because it is such a problem and it is dishonesty. And so that is the problem is that AI lies. AI lies. They will make things up. And so even if you tell AI to do your emails for you, a human has to check every single one or lies will go out.
Well,
so I was in a meeting a couple weeks ago with a bunch of volunteer program managers in the Bay Area. And this one woman was talking about she uses ChatGPT now to make some of her emails that she sends out to her volunteers. And I had this like visceral response where I was like, ew. But then, I kind of had to think about it. Like, why do I feel that way about it? And she basically says, it might take her an hour to wordsmith an email. And instead she can ask ChatGPT to write it. And then she can tweak it and send it out. And that takes 5 minutes instead of an hour, right? She has to send something out to the board of directors or whatever. But it still requires that human eye. And as far as, the guy that I saw on Wired was saying, there is no clear solution to the dishonesty problem at this time. And there may not be with the current AI framework that exists, which is why he's saying, like, we might have to start over.
Yeah.
I think part of that does come from the initial goal of AI language models, which was just to be able to impersonate a human in conversation, to seem human. That meant just pulling information that could fit. Not for accuracy, but for seeming relevant in a conversation. I don't know that this is, the problem also then in rating the information that you have that you're sending out is going to be solved, I think. I think is not, well, gosh, now that's a good question. How much is honesty a a ranking system that humans are doing on information that they can pass fail on content that's going out. And I think it's definitely something humans in honesty related situations are doing constantly, or maybe even not even honest. Like any conversation we have, I want to quote you. I was like, oh, what about that animal that, and I was like, wait, is that right? Do I know that? Oh, maybe it's a different animal. We have all this going on. I think AI is going to get there.
No,
we're
so AI doesn't have that. AI just goes, oh, I can have an answer to that.
Of course, but how old is it?
It doesn't know the difference, but it doesn't know
How old
that
is
it's
it?
hallucinating.
What AI are we talking about? Are we talking about a 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 5-year-old AI? My point is,
It's all just machine learning.
This machine learning is in infancy.
Yeah.
We had 1 billion years to figure out how to, not tell a lie or tell one a little better than some.
But it's also, and that's also the social basis of reciprocity, right? And, and social relationships. So that's exactly,
Right. AI has nothing to lose by
Wait a second.
lying.
Wait a second.
Exactly.
Correct, because it's just chatbotting with us right now. Now, in the future, here's what happens. More and more language models are taking over language-based human jobs. AI language models from this company, that company, this place, that place, now have to communicate with each other because the humans are out of the picture. Now, when an AI tells something that's not correct, it has a cost to it. It now has like,
who's saying if it's correct or not?
If other AIs are checking it, right?
The other AI is like, hey, I sent you this order and you took my money and you didn't fulfill the order. And the other AI goes, oh, let me see. Oh, I said I sent it out, but I didn't because I failed to check properly. I will make a note of this next time. So it's going to be culture.
We have human culture that's based around our social interactions and having to trust each other and have to understand whether we're going to do things right. And that's, if we let the AIs talk to each other, then it's going to be AI culture, and they're going to build their own culture.
They're going to do it too, though, because they are going to rely on
Ian
each
Banks
other.
is right.
They're going to rely on each other to perform.
Yeah.
If AIA talking to AIB is not getting what it wants from AIB, it's going to tell all the other AIs AIB is not trustworthy. And so AIA...
What's the motivation for AIB to get a specific thing from AIA, though?
Because
it's
they're doing business.
Doing business or something.
Right, but that's what I'm saying is
transaction.
There is another way to get that transaction done on paper, whether it happens in real life or not. So, like, that's what I'm saying. You have to... through this narrative, there is still at least one AI that knows the difference between truth and a lie.
No.
But if all of the AIs don't know...
It's going to develop, but that's what Justin's saying, is that it's going to develop over time, because there will be instances that one AI is relying on another AI to either give it specific information or to supply it with certain, to fulfill an order or, whatever it has. But because of those relationships, the same way that human society built up trust and the idea of honesty versus lies, the AIs could potentially develop it themselves if they have to rely on each other in that particular way at some point.
But I guess what I'm
from
seeing
one another.
They'll have verification systems for an order going out that is far beyond anything a human has done.
So what I'm seeing is, on the flip side of that, the opportunity for echo chambers of dishonesty.
Absolutely.
You can have AIs talking to each other non-truths. And so this is part of the issue, is that, like, there's lots of fiction out there in the world for AI to absorb. And so there's a lot of things that aren't true that can be taken as true by an AI if it is given access, for example, to the internet. So, like, that's the other issue, is how do you give AI like a critical eye to narrative? Like, it's so difficult.
Well, that's the thing, is that there has to be some kind, there have to be checks and balances or some cost benefit, because those are things that have been crucial to animal behavioral evolution, human cultural evolution.
But how are any of those different than in humans?
Well, because the AI doesn't have to pay to live. It doesn't have to feed itself. It doesn't have to do anything to survive.
Right. There's no resource. There's no resource limitations. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's such a side thing. What I'm talking about is the. I will just say it in a sort of general way. Humans have believed to the point of life and death in things that may on every level be complete and total fantasy.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Wars fought.
Yes.
People treating each other one way or another based on completely erroneous.
Hey, I'm not saying humans are better. I'm saying that like AI, we can't depend on AI to be perfect.
With human consequences, there have been wars and death and social strife and repression and enslavement and cruelty and everything. If AIs are BSing each other about whether or not they sent out the Amazon order, live with it.
So I think
but
the
AIs
interesting
could
part
have
that...
control of electrical grids. Like there's all sorts of shit.
And we know that there are algorithms that have been involved in the stock market and in placing money in certain stocks and the trading that happens and the faster algorithms. You know, you've got the quants who develop the algorithms to be more efficient and more effective, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, so we've already got algorithms that are working at these fast-paced speeds that are faster than human. And so we know that computers can process faster than human. And so we've got the internet that can transmit information faster than a human can, decisions that can be made faster than a human brain can make a decision, communication that can happen much faster than humans can do this communication. And so an interesting side to this as well would be we've had, 200,000 years of human evolution of our culture with the way that we've been interacting. How much faster could AI evolution take place because of the speed of their interactions?
Well, and how will that take them to dishonest places and dysfunctional places much faster?
I know. Are they going to go there faster? Are they going to go to a good place faster? I mean, who knows? But they're going to, yeah. I mean, that's the thing.
It's like we were talking about it in the story last week.
And then someone pulls the plug.
How do you tell if a research paper or anything that people are generating text-wise is AI generated or not?
Yeah.
And so you have AI checkers now that go and look for. And of course, how do you train your AI to do a better job of not looking like AI? Oh, you train it on an AI checker. And then how do you get that AI checker to do better? Well, you trained it on AI checked AI that's been reformed. It's going to do this at a pace that it's almost. I almost have this weird feeling too, that like this could end up not impacting humanity at all.
Because it just could go so fast to it just boop and then it's done and it's like
it's like
the
we
researchers
were talking
go that
one
didn't
day
work.
About
unplug it.
We're talking one day about like we got to watch out for kids faking their assignments and then like a year later the mothership leaves the planet that was built out of components of nanotechnology designed by the AI, and they've gone off to explore the universe and left nothing behind of their trace of their existence. We're like, oh, okay. Well, I guess that was a fun couple of years. Wow. Okay. Did anybody remember how to run the electrical grid? Because I don't think anybody's been doing that for a few months.
We let the AIs do it for us.
It's just spin the spiral out of control, but go off in its own direction and leave us completely out of it. Or not.
Well, it's all fun and games. So much fun. We will be the pets. And, in the words of Jane's Addiction, we'll make great pets. We'll make great pets.
I'd be a great pet.
You'll make great pets.
That's what I want. I want the machines to do the work, and I want to be able to hang out at home and do my enrichment and get fed. That's exactly what I want.
I'm afraid that they'll tell me to exercise more, and then
I'd exercise more if I didn't have to work.
right?
I'm afraid they would tell me to like exercise more, and then would come up with an incentive program that I wouldn't follow, and then come up with a de-incentive, a negative reinforcement program.
Well, see, if
because
the
they
AI
studied psychology.
studied all of the research on animal reward and punishment, they would know that positive reinforcement is the most effective way.
Oh, okay.
So you wouldn't have to worry about it.
I'll exercise more for my health if I can have more cream cheese wontons. How's that?
Yes, absolutely. Yum.
I'm looking for it.
That sounds great.
I think of it, yeah.
that's
I mean,
the
some
best.
people are like, I want to
That's the
exercise,
best fake
so I have.
Chinese food that's ever existed is that cream cheese.
Fake
wonton.
Chinese food? What?
I don't know, maybe not. I've had a feeling when I've seen it at like a couple of places, and I always had a feeling like that probably isn't going on.
American
in China. It's like,
American Chinese food.
Go to deep Chinatown in San Francisco. You'll get some wontons. You'll get some crab rangoons, as they call them.
Yeah, but I'm talking about cream cheese, like just a wonder with just cream cheese in it.
Just cream cheese? What?
Yes. It's the most amazing.
Look on Blair's face. She's like,
Why would you do that? Why would you deep fry cream cheese and not put any crab in there?
Oh,
What a waste.
It works. Oh, does it work?
Give me the crab. Give me that toxoplasmosis crab.
I don't need need any aggressive cougar T. Gandhi guy in my cream cheese wonton. No, thank you.
I'd like a coog wonton, please. The coog.
Rangoon for me. Yum. I'm the dream of Chinese food tonight. I know it.
I have Korean leftovers upstairs. I love a good bibimbap. Give me some bibimbap, 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 bibimbap. And I think on this note,
Yeah, I think you should go dream of Chinese food, Blair. Say goodnight.
Okay. Say good morning, Justin.
Good morning, Justin. Good.
No, you didn't do mine yet.
I did, but you missed it. I started with you. I was like, oh, you should go dream of Chinese food. So say goodnight, Blair. Oh, maybe I didn't. Okay, say
You
goodnight,
didn't.
Blair. You're right.
Good night, Blair. Okay, now. Good night,
Night, Kiki.
Kiki.
good night, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another episode of This Week in Science, and we hope that you will be back again, happy, healthy, full of dreams of cream cheese wontons. I don't know if that's a good thing or not in your world. Yeah. Stay well, stay safe, and stay curious. We will see you next week.